All right, my friends. Good morning, Vietnam. We are day 2 of relationship week. And just as I get myself sorted, wait for a few more people to come into the room. How's everyone going? As you can tell, still full of COVID. And I will try not to barf up a lung as I deal with the remaining remnants of this cough that I just can't seem to shake. So it's all good. Okay, let me share my screen. I forgot yesterday. All right, so welcome to day 2 of relationship week. If you want to save your marriage, make it better, or close the door on, I always get mixed up with this, or close the door on revolving relationships, this is the place for you. My name is Laurie Cherie, Laurie Arnold, whichever one you kind of resonate with. And I'm going to be talking today about how to be a better communicator in relationships. A couple of months ago, I did a survey that with a lot of women who said that, the catalyst for change in their relationship would be a breakdown of communication. But as we know, like by the time it's got to that stage, we're in kind of dire straits with communication. We don't know how to fix it. And by that stage, there's probably a lot of resentment and whatnot going on as well. So I want to give you my top 8 tips for how to be a better communicator in relationships. All right, so let me just share my screen. Audience window. This is what you're going to be seeing. All right. I think I got this going on today. All right, let's start with let me just find my presentation. I don't know where it is. I can't see it. You can. How handy is that? Okay. All right, here we go. How to be a better communicator in your relationships, day 2. You with me? Not confusing you? I'm probably confusing myself more than anything. Listening, like in communication, there's different parts to it. There's the listening part, there's the body language, there's physically the words, what we say. And today, the part that I want to focus on is the listening part, which actually makes up 45% of communication. So 70% of the time we are communicating in relationships, but 45% of that is actually made up in listening. And I believe that active listening is actually where the breakdown in communication resides. And the reason for this is because when you think about, the last argument you had or conversation with someone, is when we get up all in our own head and we start making it mean something, then we stop listening. We kind of zone out. We look to solve a problem. We tap out of the conversation because our understanding kind of wanes. Like we lose, I don't know, what's the word that I'm trying to get with here? We lose, we kind of stop seeing, like we lose attention to it. So we just stop doing it, like we start having these thoughts, it's too hard. And of course we like do it really poorly and we don't see eye to eye. And then we get to that catalyst of change where the relationship's at a really like tipping point and it's like pushing shit uphill to try and get it back on track. So here's what I want you to know about communication, right? Is before I get into that problem, there is definitely that. The brain is always trying to solve a problem. Let me start again. Number 1, we are always trying to solve for a problem. And that's what the brain is wired to do. It's wired for negativity. Your prefrontal cortex is always trying to solve. It's the planning part of your brain. And it likes a plan, which means it doesn't like uncertainty. And uncertainty looks like us Like, oh, if it's uncertain, we want to make it certain, therefore we have to solve the problem. That just isn't there. So I want you just to consider this, like, what if there was just no problem to solve when it comes to communication, when it comes to listening to what the other person says? There is no problem to solve. Just keep that one in mind. And as we work through, when you get back, like when you think back to this one, it might make sense. It might just drop in for you. There is no problem to solve, okay? When you know that your brain is wired for negativity, we're just going to point it in a different direction. We're going to give it a redirection, okay? So then number 2 is there's what he says, then there's what you hear. And this could be said for the other person as well. So something in sales that we've been taught is there's always what you see, which is on like the palm of your hand. And then when you're in a conversation with someone else, there's actually what they see. So they see this, the backhand, and I see this. And that's where we come into kind of a bit of a pickle with ourselves, is that there's this barrier. There's what we see, there's what they see. And the problem with communication is that when we are unable to see their point of view, we're able to see it from their side, we then apply definition to it. We make it mean something. We make it mean that they're not listening. We make it mean that they don't get us. We make it mean all these things, all this kind of mind drama, the negativity that the brain brings, right? We make it mean something. So think about assumptions in relationships. Like, what's the quote? The assumptions are the termites of all relationships, which means like we are believing that the other person, the person listening, doesn't know how you are feeling. They're misreading body language. We're misreading body language. And I think it kind of comes into the next point, which you can actually train yourself to notice that where you're making assumptions. And then the next part of this is when we notice ourselves making assumptions, is rather than assume, is to ask some really great questions. This is a really good way of deepening your relationship with people. Like anyone, it doesn't have to be your husband. It could be your sister, your brother, your best friend, your neighbor, your employee, your boss. You can actually ask really good questions if you want to deepen your relationship, so that you can gain more of an understanding around what they're seeing, around what they're around what you're seeing and around what they're seeing. So you can actually look for more understanding. There are some really good questions that Dave and I have actually played with when it comes to deepening our relationships. And, you know, sometimes when we don't ask great questions, or we're asking the wrong questions, I think is, and something I talk about further on is dropping an agenda, but we ask the wrong questions. You know, we ask closed questions, which only get us yes or no answers, where, excuse me, we are kind of asking the same questions. We're not asking anything differently. So here's a couple of questions you might want to consider for yourself. Like if you are feeling unvalued in your relationship, or not seen or not heard, this is a two-prong effect. There's the question, what do I value most about my partner or my loved one or my spouse? How do I show it? So how do I show that love for them? And in a communicating context, am I valuing their comments? Am I valuing their discussion? And the chances are, if there's some underlying assumptions and there's, you know, your brain chirping in with all these negative comments, or, you know, negative kind of commentary, then of course, like potentially we may not be valuing what they have to say. And therefore we don't show up in that way. The other question is also to consider is, do you feel valued by your partner or your spouse? How do they show it? So when you're conversing, what are they doing? What are they saying? How are they behaving when you're trying to have a conversation with them? And do you feel valued? And how do you want to be valued in those moments where you're having conversations, when you're having discussions? I think they're interesting questions to play with. But I think it always starts with you. How do I show up? How do I value what my person is saying to me, what they're saying, and what I'm hearing? And then the next part, number 4, is like I just was kind of talking about, was drop the agenda. So quite often with assumptions is that we start to build these agendas. So we know what outcome we're trying to get, which of course leaves room for actually actively listening to what is going on in that conversation. What is going on when you're communicating? Dropping the agenda means going in there. So your brain has to allow itself to be uncertain. It has to go in there not trying to solve for the problem. And the way in which you do that is by dropping the agenda, leaning in with curiosity. That is a huge one. And again, kind of the last question is asking great questions. What question can I hear? What questions have I got here that I can ask to actually learn more, to look for more understanding, to gain an insight into how they see something? What is their perspective on this? I know what mine is, but what is theirs? When we drop into that space, it's a beautiful place to be in. So I want you to just try that try that. And this is where I'm coming up to next. Oh no, not next, a couple more. Number 5 is I talk about holding space. So if you're a coach or a consultant, you may have been taught this very, very valuable skill when it comes to clients. When you're coaching, we have to hold space, which means that when they are talking, we are listening. We are listening purely for understanding. And then we ask really good questions so that we can get a bigger picture, so that we can get a different perspective, so we can see what they're thinking. And then we can kind of, as coaches, I suppose this is where we come in, where we can go, oh, okay, like this is what they're not seeing. Here's kind of some blinkers. But in terms of a relationship, holding space looks like dropping judgment, thinking to yourself, what can I learn from this conversation? And then also asking yourself, how could this be the best place for me to be in my relationship? In this silence, in this awkward silence, how could this just be the best space, best place? There's no agenda to fill. There's no problem to solve. Nada. Doesn't exist. There's just me, him, me or her, whatever it is. And I'm just going to drop the judgment during that conversation. And something that we actually do in coaching too is, 5-10 minutes before we have clients, is to write all your thoughts. So you're allowed to judge a person before you go into these coaching calls, and you take all the judgments that are in your head. So, all the negativity that your brain is trying to drum up, you take all of that judgment that's in your head and you put it onto a piece of paper. Take it out, clear it out, move it over. And then when you show up in these conversations, you've got a very clean space to play with. And it's a beautiful thing. So try that one, holding space. Some people might call it biting your tongue, just allowing for silence. So I love that one. Shh. Allowing for the silence, allowing for the perfection in the moment. And I was alluding to a couple of slides ago is, communicating is a skill. It's a skill that we have to learn. Again, they teach us how to read and do maths, the things at school, but they don't teach us necessarily like how to regulate our emotions and how to be great communicators, how to understand when someone's talking, what do we make that mean? So practice makes perfect. Like we just have to be willing to have these difficult conversations. And yeah, that sometimes we're not going to always get our conversations right and the way we communicate. But I think that could be a bit of fun, is experimenting with how can I ask better questions? How can I learn how to hold space? Like, where am I trying to jump the gun? Where am I trying to solve for things? What am I, like, when he's speaking, what am I listening to? And the work is always to be done here. Like, yes, they play their part in communication, but if we get really good at the skill of these 6 things so far, I've got 2 more to come, is we then take control of that situation or that conversation or our own emotional well-being by looking at the skill from the place of, I want to get better at this. Like, I'm not just going to tap out. I'm not going to quit when things get too hard. I am going to learn how to become a better communicator. Something in business, we talk about scientific method. Test with an experiment. What works? What doesn't work? Try it again. Draw a new conclusion. Create a new hypothesis. Repeat until you get the result that you want. And sometimes in relationships, that's exactly what you need to do with communication. You need to keep figuring out, not just tap out. Another thing you could consider too is, and I say this very lightly, is boundaries. Number 7 being boundaries. And what this looks like is not to put a wall up around other people, but there's, when we're having communication, it breaks down. We always, our emotional intelligence isn't at a particular level, like if it's not being developed or we're not developing it, is we show up, we react, and we respond in a way that we don't like. We become very reactive. And in those moments when you're like heat of the moment, you're having an argument and you show up and you say something and you throw something and you storm out and you say, I'm fine, and you're not fine. I want you to consider boundaries for yourself. Like, when I'm having this conversation with my husband and he taps out, what are my boundaries? How am I going to keep trying to have this conversation? Am I going to have this conversation? Do I need to do it at another time? Do I need to put a boundary in place where it's, here's a outcome that I want to achieve, and here's a consequence. Tell them what the boundary is. But I want you to remember is that boundaries, we can put those boundaries in place, but people don't have to abide by them. And then what are you going to do? If they choose not to abide by that boundary, what are you going to do? That's where I think there's a lot of mind management. There's a lot of mindset work that is to be done around when people don't do the things we want them to do. Yesterday I talked about expectation. When people don't do what we want them to do, we set ourselves up for disappointment because we want them to do it so that it makes us happy. So I just want you to consider boundaries, but consider boundaries for the right reasons, and for reasons that you actually like. And remember, they're not to keep people out. They're literally to help us regulate the way in which we use our emotions. And then the last one I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about more about energy on Friday, but I thought this was a really good place to at least start the conversation, is when you're in masculine and feminine energy. And I know for me, I came through a corporate background with working mostly in male-dominated industries, and there was a lot of I've always had a lot of easily kind of, it's just there, a masculine energy to tap into. When I think about my mum, she was also a very masculine kind of person. And so it's very easy to drop into masculine energy for me. I want you to consider in your relationships is like, so here's a few masculine type energies, right? And I want you to think about energy that is empowering versus energy that is disempowering. So disempowering masculine energy are things like overthinking, controlling the conversation, getting aggressive, potentially being abusive, like swearing, doing those things. Perfectionism, where are you trying to be a perfectionist in your relationship? Confrontational, the first sign of war is defense. Am I being confrontational? Overbearing, emotionless, heartless, there's some really disempowering energy there in terms of masculine. when you think about masculine empowering energy, it's the art of doing, it's the action orientated, it's focused, it's ambitious, it's boundaries, it's goal orientated, it's confident, supportive. So there's a lot of empowering energies there. But here's where I want you to think about female energy. Like if you dropped out of your masculine energy and you just tapped into some more female energy, or not, sorry, it's not female energy, it's feminine energy. Think about the disempowering energy that you can have in terms of femininity is we're insecure, maybe codependent, a little bit needy, over emotional, always like apologizing, unable to set boundaries, a lot of shame and guilt, feeling unworthy, conforming, and even this one, manipulation. I think there's a lot of manipulating that tries to go on through conversations because we have agendas. We have agendas that just don't need to be there, and we're trying to control the situation to receive an outcome that's going to make us feel better. So in your relationships and in your conversations and your discussions and communicating, here's some really empowered energy that you can use. Think about, it's not about doing, it's about who you are being, who you are showing up as. Are you being authentic? Like, is there vulnerability in your relationship? Are you allowing yourself to not know the answer? Are you allowing yourself to be imperfect? Some other energy, intuitive, like, does this conversation feel right? What am I trying to achieve by having this conversation? Are you receiving? Again, what am I listening to? That's a really feminine energy space to be in. What am I listening to? How can I make this playful? I am massive about fun in relationships, and in terms of like, I'm still not a whiz at communicating, but gee whiz, like now that I know, using like all my sales skills and coaching and learning about energy and human design, I'm a lot better at being playful, being curious in my relationship, asking really good questions. I was having a conversation with Dave last night, and when I said to him, like, how do we communicate? And when you think about what I do as a spouse, he said, you're always really patient. You're really patient. You don't judge me. You let me speak. So it was a really interesting conversation to have with him. And it could be one you have too, is where you do tap in and you say, hey, like, what do you think? Am I a good listener? And you're going to get a really good answer from that question. Be prepared for it. They might say, no, you're a shit house. And again, it's just a skill. How can I get better? How might I be a better communicator? How might I show up in these relationships by, being vulnerable, being compassionate, having empathy? These are all these energetic displays that are empowering, that come from feminine energy. So those are my 8 for you guys today. Just let me unshare my screen. So I can keep chatting to you. Stop share. And I'm back. We're back in business. So those are the top 8 that I have for you guys today. I'll just do a bit of a recap just so that you can see it at the end of this little prezzo. Make sure, if you haven't already, you join my Relationships by Design group. I'd love you to be in there on Facebook. And of course, I've also got, if you want to work with me further, if you have, if you're in this place in your relationships where they feel like they just need to be done differently, if you want to, kind of close the door on shitty relationships, save your marriage, all the things. If you want to be married for the last time, if you want to be a badass communicator with your soulmate, then I do have a one-on-one training program. Drop me some comments below, or drop into my community, and I can let you know more about that if you wanted to work with me further. So thank you for putting up with my croakiness and me trying to catch my breath. So here's a summary for today is there is no problem to solve, number one. Number two, there's what he says and there's what you hear. So assumptions. Number three, ask great questions. If you want to deepen your relationship, look for more understanding. Number four, hold space, drop the judgment. What can I learn from this conversation? How could this be the best place for me to be in this relationship? Number four, practice makes perfect. It's a skill. Communicating is a skill that we have to continually work at. Number five, boundaries. What boundaries do you need to have in place? I think I've got these run the wrong way, but that's okay. The next one, drop the agenda, lean in with curiosity. Again, ask great questions. And then the next one, I'm just trying to get to my notes. Oh my goodness, having a real hard time today. Dropping the agenda, and yeah, let's just finish with this one, number 8. If you need to go back through empowered versus disempowered energy, like people and planets are energy, conversations are energy. So just tap into, where am I showing up disempowered and where can I show up more empowered? All right, my friends, that's what I have for you today. I'm going to go and rest my voice and rest all of this. Thanks for being here. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow's day 3, and we are going to be talking about, I can't even remember what day 3 is. Here you go. We're going to be talking about how to start healing from any past relationship trauma. So that's going to be a big topic, but I'm going to just make it really simple, really easy, definitely not too big for the context of relationship week. It's just, another area that I work in when it comes to my clients and helping them actually heal from past relationship trauma that I too have experienced. So yeah, can't wait to see you in there, my friends. And yeah, it's a wrap. All right.